Hi, my name is Ken Irwin. I'm a web services librarian at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. When I started at Miami just about 2 years ago, one of the first hoped-for projects described to me was a personalized dashboard that would give each user a gateway to resources just for them. I was both interested in and daunted by this project because it wasn't the first time I'd considered developing such a resource. We got there, and I'm going to talk about how. The code is ready to be shared as an open source project, and I'm going to talk about the ways we can work together to expand this project to users in your library. But for context, I'm going to start with a little bit of history. Once upon a time, in the early days of this millennium, I was building my first database-driven library website for a library at a small liberal arts institution. Built on a relational database, the website was subject-aware. Each database and class web page were associated with one or more subjects, and each liaison librarian was affiliated with subjects drawn from that same list. It should have been possible, I thought, to have the library users select their favorite subjects or resources and save them to a profile that would load whenever they used the library's website. It was a great idea, but it was a bigger project than I was prepared for at the time. Some of the obstacles were having to create authentication and user management mechanisms, getting users to populate their data and keep it up to date from semester to semester as their course enrollments change, and managing an increasingly complex relational database. Daunted by the prospect of managing these issues and building a lot of new-to-me functionality, the project sat on my back burner and was eventually forgotten. I wasn't the only one thinking along those lines at the time. Inspired by MyYahoo's customization options, librarian Jimmy Gaffrey at Virginia Commonwealth University built a system similar to what I had in mind in the late 90s. Although it was popular with the librarians, it didn't catch on as much for library users. Instead, its most popular use was as a way to build class web pages. Librarians used the system to quickly and easily create a list of resources appropriate to a class. Reading about it now, it sounds like an early precursor to the LibGuide, which is particularly interesting to me as LibGuides themselves play a significant role in how I would overcome some of the key obstacles I described as hindrances once upon a time. 20 years later, the Miami University Libraries formulated a new vision for their organization. We proactively connect our community with the resources and personalized guidance to empower discovery, creation, and success. In pursuit of that vision, the web team, prior to my arrival, articulated several goals, including one to create a personalized research dashboard with databases and research guides. When I was hired in 2019, that goal was near the top of the agenda, and it was my job to lead the project to achieve it. So now, knowing my own history with the idea, and having read about VCU's experience when I did an initial lit review, I approached this new project with an eye toward what resources would help me make the project more achievable this time. Here's what I found. Authentication and user management are vastly simplified by using the campus single sign-on. The single sign-on also gave us a baseline for populating a user's subject affiliations. And rather than needing a homegrown relational database, SpringShare's LibGuides has become a ubiquitous tool in libraries for managing and sharing subject-based lists of databases, librarians, and subject guides. By building on these cornerstones, we were able to create the user dashboard without having to devise the underlying technology from scratch. In addition to not having to create the underlying database structure, LibGuides allows our dashboard to piggyback on work that's already being done in the libraries. Subject librarians put a huge amount of time and effort into creating and maintaining LibGuides and choosing the best databases to fit each of their subject areas. By maintaining their LibGuides much as they've done for years, they will now also be curating resources for the dashboard. While developing this resource has certainly added work for the web team for the moment, it offers an additional platform through which students can encounter their subject librarians without the librarians having to do more work to reach the students. During most of the development process, this resource was just called the dashboard. But if your library is anything like ours, they love making dashboards, and the word has started sounding pretty vague. Our service launched under the name MyGuide, and it now has a cute little logo to go with it. I use MyGuide, Dashboard, and MyGuide Dashboard pretty much interchangeably throughout this presentation. Here was the vision for the project. The user logs into CAS, the Campus Single Sign-On System. CAS knows a lot of things about users, including their name, whether they're student, faculty, or staff, their majors and minors, what courses they're currently enrolled in or teaching, and for faculty and staff, their departmental affiliations. Those course, major, and department affiliations can be used to identify subject areas of current interest from semester to semester. Meanwhile, the LibGuides API lets us extract lists of subjects, guides, databases, and librarians. The subjects list is the key to the rest. Each guide, database, and librarian can be associated with any number of subjects. The LibGuides API provides data in JSON format, which can be easily parsed to return just the librarians, databases, and guides that are affiliated with each subject. We can combine these data to create a single file's worth of content for each subject area, listing the guides, databases, and librarians for that subject. The LibGuides API queries detailing subjects, guides, databases, and librarians bring back prodigious amounts of data, nearly 1 million lines of JSON between the 4 files. Fetching the data takes about a minute, and then a little longer to separate it out into individual subjects, so it's important for us to pre-compile the data into these subject files in advance of when our user arrives at the site. That keeps the website itself operating quickly and reduces overhead. An automated process fetches and recompiles the subject information once a week to keep the data fresh. The next step was one of the most labor-intensive and will be unique to each institution that uses MyGuide: creating relationships between university-recognized subject areas and the far fewer LibGuide subject areas. Our university has over 1,000 subject-related codes. Meanwhile, each of these university codes needs to be associated with one of the LibGuide subject areas, of which there are only 91. Creating a data map to describe these relationships was laborious and required input from many subject librarians. To help manage these subject relationships, we wrote an audit script to pick up any lapses or discrepancies introduced by new data and by the occasional typo. In addition to students and faculty, we've done our best to provide resources for university staff in areas outside of the academic side of the house as well. But these results are imperfect because LibGuide subject areas are academic areas. Some of the university areas fall outside of what can match well with a LibGuide subject. Many areas, such as the president's and provost offices, see resources associated with the Department of Educational Leadership, which is a natural fit for their day-to-day business. Meanwhile, staff in the bursar's office will see resources for accountancy. As you can see from the text in yellow resulting from the audit script, there are some subject codes that we just don't have any sensible subject matches for. Okay, so we have a login system that knows about a user's various subject indicating codes, a collection of files that knows about the librarians, databases, and subject guides for each LibGuide subject area, and a file that maps the relationships between the campus codes and the LibGuide subject areas. These are all the primary building blocks that make our dashboard possible. When a user logs in, the system reads their subject affiliations. It identifies the associated LibGuide subjects and then pulls the pre-compiled file for each of those subjects. It takes a user's name and status, as well as all of the subject information, and assembles it into one data package. That package gets handed off to a script that generates a single web page featuring all of the information organized by subject area. In version 2, which is under development now, we will add another component into this mix. Users are able to select their favorite subjects, databases, and guides. Their favorites information is stored in a database, keyed to a hash of their username. At login time, we retrieve a list of their favorites to let that inform what they're going to see. At this stage, we need to know if they have any favorite subjects. Maybe they aren't a history major, but they like bringing a historical lens to other subjects. If they favorite the history subject, we will always include history as a subject for them, whether their main record has a history class in it or not. That way, history will be added to their list of subjects to display, and the precompile subjects files step will add a history file into that mix. Once the data package is compiled, the system will also check to see if any of the databases or research guides have been favorited as well. This step modifies the data object to add a favorite equals true property to each favorited item, and that data will then be passed along to the display and it will be highlighted there. So here's what we get when we put that all together. We have a single web page that has multiple tabs, one for each of the user's subject areas. Each subject area shows the librarian, subject guides, and databases for that subject. The librarian's customizations, such as contact information and appointment scheduling widgets, are included in the data from the LibGuides API, and so they appear in the dashboard. If there were more than one librarian associated with a subject, they would appear stacked with abbreviated views that the user can fold and unfold to reveal the full contact information for that subject librarian. The Subject Guides panel links to each of the guides for a particular subject area. The Databases panel doesn't show the full list of databases relevant to a subject, but only the ones listed as best bets for that subject. There is a link to the full list of databases for that subject as well. That limitation to just the best bet databases may change in the near future, and I'll talk about that more in a little bit. You can see that each database and guide has the shadow of a star next to it, and that a few of those stars are filled in with gold to indicate that their user has selected them as favorites. We can click the star to add or remove its favorite status. It takes just a moment to change the icon because it's talking to the database in the background, and will only change to the new status if the database was successfully updated. Favorite subjects are managed through a different mechanism, linked at the bottom of the subject list on the left. You'll remember that we have literally hundreds of subject areas to choose from, so users select from a searchable pull-down list to add new subjects. Their list of current favorite subjects is displayed below, and the user can remove a favorite subject by clicking on the X next to the subject name. I'm going to add accountancy as a favorite subject. Now returning to the main view, you'll see that the subject list is changed to include accountancy as a subject. On the right, we have two other elements that we haven't talked about yet. One is a snippet of circulation data. Our campus uses III's Sierra as our ILS, so this data is pulled from Sierra's Patron API. Since this data is more private than a user's subject areas, we've chosen to keep it hidden until the user reveals it. That kind of privacy might be welcome when a librarian, faculty member, or a student pulls up the page and doesn't want everyone else to know about their hideous library fine. I've taught classes in the past that got to learn all about my egregious library fines when I demonstrated how to view your library account, and I don't want to force that on anyone. The account information revealed includes the number of checkouts, the number of holds, and the patron's fine amount. Due to the limitations of Sierra's API, it is not a fully featured view of their patron record. It lacks detailed lists of checkouts, holds, or fines, and cannot be used to renew materials. So it makes for a good glimpse, but it's not as much information as we might hope for. The users still have to visit their patron record to get the full information. It is to be hoped that the next generation of ILSs will allow more API-based interaction from authenticated external sources like this one, so we might be able to provide a more robust service without having to have the patron log into another service. Our second additional element is the featured guide. The Life Guide is a LibGuide aimed at all users that can be applicable to anyone. It highlights a number of non-academic resources that anyone in the campus community might want to use. It was included in part to provide a bit of content for users who might not have very much subject-oriented content showing up. It also highlights the fact that the library has many resources that go beyond the needs of the classroom and researchers. It features the library's support for home, family, hobbies, health, and more. This takes advantage of a featured content setting in My Guide, through which a library can create a bit of content to include on every page of the dashboard. In general, this all works pretty well, but it is not without its tricky aspects. Although librarians are one of the target demographics for this service, the system as it was originally designed had little to offer them. Because the system offers content based on LibGuide subject areas, and because we don't have a LibGuide subject for library science, there was no content to show library employees. That led us to develop a mechanism for creating custom content. Basically, we manually generated a subject file as though we had a LibGuide and included a few resources relevant to most library staff. It's still fairly sparse, but it's something. A related challenge is that the system only knows about subject relationships known to the campus authentication system. There's nothing in the university's larger system that knows about who the library's subject liaisons are. So the subject librarians would see that pretty basic library display I just showed, and not the content related to their liaison departments. That lapse was particularly relevant for librarians wanting to show the dashboard to students during an instruction session. We wanted to have the librarians see their liaison subjects reflected here, so we had to rethink a bit of the workflow by which the system knows about those liaison subjects. To do this, we added a new feature. At login time, we capture the user's email address and then query the LibGuide's subject information to find all the subject areas for which a user with that email address is listed as the expert in LibGuides. Then we add those subject areas to the librarian's display. Another challenge was the fact that the university's data systems are outside of our control and contain a certain amount of incorrect legacy data. At first, we thought we could just safely ignore the outdated content, like the subject code for the defunct campus radio station, because it just wouldn't show up in anybody's data. But then we found that some library employees were still listed as belonging to a defunct former library on campus, and we needed to take steps so that the librarians using the dashboard with a class wouldn't be displaying outdated information on their own screens. We were eventually able to get the university to correct the underlying data problem, but we initially had to trick the system into displaying the updated information. One challenge we experienced has to do with the consistency of data formatting in LibGuides. It is the nature of LibGuides that each librarian has a fair amount of control and autonomy about how they set up their profiles. Prior to the development of the MyGuide dashboard, librarians' profiles setups in LibGuides served only one purpose. They established how a librarian's contact information is displayed in the LibGuides interface itself. It basically functioned as a formatting tool. So some users would, for instance, put in their office address, their phone number, their email address, all in the address field of their profile, and then use HTML tags to format it just the way they wanted it. In some cases, it was also used to link to the Schedule Me widget. Because the dashboard formats its view of the librarian's information based on the API metadata corresponding to the fields they fill out on the form in LibGuides, the web team had to work with the librarians to regularize how data was represented in their profile information. In some cases, that meant coming up with new solutions to meet the goals that the librarians had previously accomplished by using LibGuides profiles as unfielded, user-formatted data. Although it was a surprise to find that our structured data wasn't always as structured as we had expected, it made for a good opportunity to introduce some greater regularity into how LibGuides was used in our library. One issue we have not yet resolved is how to handle multiple campuses that share a LibGuides instance, but which have separate subject guides and librarians from each other. When we first imagined the service, we were hoping to include all of our campuses, but we found that the 3 campuses all use LibGuides differently, and the decision was made to focus the service on our main Oxford campus to start. I'm still hoping to be able to serve our regional campuses as well, and it may be as simple as spinning up separate instances of MyGuide for each campus, but we still need to work out those details. Privacy is a big concern for libraries and librarians, myself included. So while I was excited about the availability of robust user information at login, I also wanted to make sure that we were using and storing the data appropriately. Our first concern was not creeping people out. What we realized, though, is that other campus systems already make use of these kinds of data. Canvas, our learning management system, knows what courses a user is taking and populates their account accordingly. This kind of customization is a service to our users and not a big brotherly intrusion. The students involved with pre-launch user testing all got it immediately. They recognized the subjects selected in their menu as ones that applied to their own current courses, and none expressed concern about how the system knew what to show them. Now, students these days are notoriously less concerned about privacy than earlier generations, so that alone is not necessarily a particularly stringent measure of concern. When we first demonstrated an early version of MyGuide to the subject librarians, I heard from one that they had expected to dislike the system because of that big brotherly feel, and they were surprised to find that it seemed useful rather than creepy. Here's an entry from our logs. There isn't any private information here. The username is stored as an encrypted hash so we can tell one user from another, but we don't know who they are. We know their subject information, and a person with access to the registrar's data system could probably work out who was who, But what would it get them? It would tell them that a user logged into the library at a particular time. That's about it. The best way to protect our users' data is to not collect and store unneeded data. Users' selected favorites in version 2 are stored using the same kind of encryption, so that the same encrypted string will be associated with the IDs of favorite subjects, databases, and guides. Again, the data is stored in a way that would be difficult to associate with a particular user, and even if you could, the list of favorites would not be particularly sensitive information. Most of the logging we're doing is to help us understand how the system is being used. The MyGuide dashboard had a soft launch in the first week of September. We added a link to the front page of the website, and librarians have been using it in their classes. We used the soft launch period to fix those kinds of bugs that snuck through the pre-launch testing. After fixing the initial remaining bugs, we began our more formal launch period and put out a series of blog articles, social media posts, and memos to departments on campus. So far, we've only built some fairly simple data analytics focused on counting usage and distinct users and distinguishing between student, faculty, and staff users. We're recording data that will also know more about a user's subject affiliations. We have not yet built any analysis tools to learn about those patterns, but those additional analysis features are still in the works. Here's what we know so far about our usage. This is based on the statistics from September 2021 through February of 2022. That's 6 months of data and represents most of Miami's fall semester, as well as our less active January term and the first month of spring. This slide shows daily uses by students, not faculty and staff, during that time. You can see that there's a steady pattern of usage during the fall semester, and a significant drop-off over the holidays as well as during the January term. Things pick up again on the first day of spring semester, and they continue along steadily in the spring, but at a bit of a lower rate than in the fall. My hypothesis is that the higher usage in the fall may reflect some combination of demonstrations in class by faculty who just learned about the service, and of demonstrations by librarians who were using the feature in their instruction sessions. Many users of the system logged in only once, which makes me think that perhaps they were shown the resource in class and followed along, but they haven't returned to it. The higher rates in the fall may reflect the initial excitement about the resource after it was announced, and it may take a while longer to get a sense of what the long-term usage patterns is going to look like. In addition to the daily usage rates, we're also able to look at the frequency with which users return to the resource. This can help us to understand the differences between students who've used the MyGuide once or twice and those who have made it a regular part of their research pattern, which is, of course, what we hope will be people's relationship to the service. Here are a few different ways we have of looking at that data. This slide looks at return users. Of all of the 678 student users in the first 6 months, how many used MyGuide once, twice, or more times? Nearly 2/3 logged in only once, and fewer than a quarter of users used the service more than twice. There are about a dozen users who have come back more than 10 times. That doesn't sound like a lot, and maybe it's not. But I'm still hopeful that this may represent a meaningful toehold, and that with more time, development, and promotion, we may increase the popularity of the service. This next slide gives us a different way of visualizing the usage that I find a bit more hopeful. This looks at the total number of uses of the service, differentiated by the level of repeat usage. By this reckoning, nearly half of the student usage of this service is from folks who've logged in 3 or more times. This line of inquiry made me think of the Pareto principle, perhaps better known to librarians as the 80-20 rule. According to this aphorism, 80% of the use may be driven by 20% of the users, or 20% of the collection might account for 80% of the circulation. Our usage so far does not fit this model. It might be about accurate to say that 50% of our use is from 17% of our users. That's never going to make a pithy aphorism, but it seems to reflect the facts so far. To date, we've only built some fairly simple data analytics focused on counting usage and distinct users and distinguishing between student, faculty, and staff users. We're recording data that will know more about a user's subject affiliations. We have not yet built any analysis tools to learn about those patterns, but those additional analysis features are in the works. I am hopeful that this summer I may have a chance to dig deeper into these data and also to correlate them with our instruction statistics from the past year. I'd also like to look for hourly patterns that might reveal what usage is driven by instruction and what usage is driven from users outside of class. And of course, I'd like to have some more analysis baked into MyGuide itself so that it's easy for administrators to gauge the reach of the service. MyGuide is built in Node.js, a back-end JavaScript framework. We chose Node because it does a good job of handling asynchronous data requests, retrieving and parsing the JSON data format used by both our campus APIs and the LibGuides APIs, and rendering JSON data into user-friendly web pages using embedded JavaScripts or EJS templates. The beautiful front end, designed by my colleague Ming Qiu, uses Bootstrap and EJS. Version 1 of the dashboard was built with no need for a database, but version 2 will use a MongoDB-compatible NoSQL database to store user preferences. While version 1 used the same content for all users in a given discipline, version 2 will be focused on providing true user-driven personalization, letting users identify their own favorite subjects and resources. That expansion will add a level of complexity that we were explicitly avoiding in the first iteration because it was important to have some default content to use as a starting point before we get into individualized customization. Not surprisingly, however, users were asking for the ability to add individualized favorites even before the launch of version 1, and the development of version 2 began almost as soon as version 1 was completed and launched at the beginning of the school year. We're aiming to roll out version 2 over the summer, so it will be ready for the 2022 to 2023 academic year. More important in some ways than the addition of user preferences, though, are some things happening under the hood in version 2, and those changes may matter more to you. Version 2 was really designed just for our campus environment. It assumed the presence of our authentication system, CAS, as well as the Sierra ILS. Under version 2, we've refactored the system to use separate modules for authentication and circulation functionality. Using modularization allows for different underlying technologies. The codebase still only includes CAS for authentication and Sierra for circulation data, but it's written in a way that new modules could be written and plugged into place as institutions with different systems adopt MyGuide. An administrator would configure which modules to use when they install the system. Version 1 directly inherited its monofocus on local tools from the first proof-of-concept attempts to connect LibGuides with the campus user information. That monofocus might have been okay for a proof of concept, but it would have been wise of us to rewrite for modularity earlier on. Even if we hadn't wanted to make this an open-source project suitable for use at other institutions, the modularity will also help us for any retooling that occurs on our campus. It is likely that we may have a new ILS within 3 to 5 years, and the less rewriting we have to do then, the better. And for authentication, that's something outside the library's control entirely, so best to plan for modularity there as well. One major component that we did not plan for modularity around is LibGuides itself. The entire structure of MyGuide is based around the essential structure of LibGuides, guides, databases, and librarians attached to subject areas. And the data package sent from the back end to build the front end is almost entirely made up of JSON objects from the LibGuides API. If an institution wanted to build a tool of this sort on the back of a different library subject guide service like Subject Plus, substantial refactoring would be required. The MyGuide service also operates on the idea that courses, majors, and department codes will be a relevant way of identifying subject information. It could be that when our open source code encounters the real diversity of ways that different universities code their subject information, we may need an abstraction layer to regularize how the system understands the relationship between university entities and their associated LibGuide subjects. If other institutions have different structures, that will have to be accounted for in future versions. An additional change that we're considering is not driven by technical concerns, but rather by epistemological and pedagogical ones. One of the challenges of algorithmically derived content is that it can limit the breadth of our vision. My colleague Ione Damasco from the University of Dayton pointed out that limiting databases presented in LibGuides to those from the top databases in each field may prioritize selected voices and further suppress marginalized and minoritized voices in a field. The databases listed as top resources in a field, such as PsycInfo and psychology or the MLA bibliography and literature, should be highlighted in those disciplines. But by restricting the researcher's view to those databases, undiversifies the content options. Many of our librarians put significant effort into selecting additional resources in each discipline, which can increase representation for interdisciplinary perspectives and diverse voices. When initially creating My Guide, we decided just to show the top databases because the full list of additional resources in each field is often quite long. While some subjects have only a handful of non-top databases, others list 20 to 40 non-top databases. History tops the list with 147 non-top databases. That level of inclusiveness seemed overwhelming on the basis of sheer numbers, but in light of Ione's comments, I'm rethinking the original plan. One way to manage the long lists may be to separate the content into top databases and the rest, and then allow users to select favorites from the lower portion of the list, and for those favorites to float to the top. We are currently thinking through the changes required to implement this feature, but we have not yet arrived at an implementation. The code for My Guide is available on GitHub, and we are just at the point where we would like to identify a few interested institutions who'd like to try out the system. If you'd like to develop a system like this for your users, I'd like to talk to you about it. Because the My Guide dashboard is closely integrated with our campus systems both for login and for understanding subject relationships, you won't be able to just install the software and go. If you happen to use CAS and/or Sierra, that may simplify the process. But if not, we're also interested in expanding the system to work with other components. Either way, some custom code may need to be written. The software is open source and adaptable, and I hope to work with a few co-conspirators at other libraries to make a system like this available to more users. What I've shown here are our first steps toward one way of realizing our library's vision of proactively connecting our community with resources and personalized guidance to empower discovery, creation, and success. By building on external, independently maintained data that already exists in LibGuides, and combining it with data from our campus single sign-on, we're able to create innovative new forms of customized access to information without adding substantial new management burdens for library staff. I am on the lookout for additional kinds of subject-coded content that could be incorporated into this kind of system. As a library portal, I think the basic elements are already here. Could this be scaled up to include other kinds of content, though, beyond the library to be a university-level function of which the library components are just a part? For example, my colleague Jerry Yarnetsky wondered, what if campus events were coded by the department that hosts them, or subject areas of interests, and were available in an RSS feed that could feed into a My Guide type interface, featuring campus events potentially of interest to the student? There are limitations to this idea, most especially the fact that events of interest to a student are certainly not going to be limited to subject areas reflected in the student's registrar information. That's the only concrete example we've come up with, and it's not enough to build a separate service around. But I wonder what other ideas people might come up with when this model of funneling information to our users is possible. In a less dramatic jump, we have also considered using the JavaScript module bundler Webpack to bring this functionality into the front page of the library's website, rather than needing it to be linked from the site. We haven't worked out those details yet, but it remains a possibility in the next iteration of our library's web presence. I believe that this sort of customized content is an important direction for libraries to consider as we continue to compete for our users' time and attention. Having to navigate the wealth of library resources has long been a barrier to our users actually using what we have to offer. I hope that systems like this one can help users spend less time navigating and more time making use of library resources, and create an online spot that users will want to come back to time and again. I'm also excited about the possibility of working with you to adapt My Guide to work for your institution. I hope that tools like this one may be a productive and prolific feature of libraries in the years to come, and I'd like to find a way into that future together. I hope that you've found this interesting, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you very much.